Hello and welcome to the Jesus Witch podcast. I'm your host, Lena Elsaya Lee, also known as Lena the Jesus Witch on TikTok and Instagram. The Jesus Witch podcast is a show dedicated to opening the conversation about including Jesus in witchery practices. The goal of this podcast is to not be evangelical. The goal is to spread the love, light, truth, acceptance, and oneness that is Jesus Christ himself. Here at the Jesus Witch podcast, we believe all people are loved by God and all people are loved by Jesus. We believe in community and the power of fellowship. We believe in giving whatever you reasonably can to help your neighbor who's in need. And above all, we believe in the power of creating a relationship with Jesus that is authentic and unique to you. Join me for new episodes of the Jesus Witch podcast every single Monday, and be sure to subscribe to us on your favorite podcasting app. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Jesus Witch podcast. I'm your host, Lena Elsaya Lee, also known as Lena the Jesus Witch on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. This week on the podcast, we are going to be talking about doing inner child work, why it's important to do it as a Jesus Witch, and how I incorporate Jesus in my inner child practice. Before we jump into this week's episode, I just want to let you know a couple of different ways that you can help support the podcast. The easiest way to help support the Jesus Witch podcast is through our Patreon. We have several different tiers with perks on each one of them. Some of the perks range from having early and ad-free episodes of the Jesus Witch podcast to one of the tiers I give Happy Mail each month, which is essentially a little package where you get a mystery spell, and then we go on Zoom together and we cast the spell. And all of the spells that I write are Bible-based, so you're learning how to incorporate the Bible into your spell work and how to do different spells. I also offer tarot spreads on there, tarot readings, all the different things. So Patreon is the easiest way to support us, and it's so fun. I love doing Patreon. Then I also have an Etsy shop where you can get different tarot readings with me. I offer Talking to Jesus tarot readings where I channel Jesus' energy and get a message from him for you. I offer inner child tarot readings. I offer astrology readings. And then my favorite thing that I offer on my Etsy shop, that was a lie. My actual favorite thing that I offer on my Etsy shop is Jesus and Christian Witch mystery boxes. Those are so much fun. Half the time I'll get an order for like a small one and I think it's a big one, and I make a big one for the smalls, and then when I make the big ones I make them extra big because I'm like, well, if I made this for the small, I gotta make it even bigger for the big. I just absolutely love creating those boxes. I love putting spells in there and like different materials, and they're just so much fun. But anyway, but my other favorite thing that I offer on my Etsy shop is Bible-based spell oils. So each of these like oils that you can anoint yourself with, they're all charged with a Bible verse, and I have different intentions to them. I have one that's like a protected by self-love spell that helps you like protect and guard your heart. Then I have one for choosing joy, which obviously helps you cultivate joy and cultivate happiness in your life and cultivate like that Jesus energy. And then I have a divine feminine one called Mother Goddess. So there's a different variety on there. You could also help support the podcast by following me on social media. Like I said before, I have TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. They all are Lena the Jesus Witch. YouTube, I don't post as much on because YouTube's really scary, but I'm trying to build my confidence to do it again. And I think a couple more like followers and like encouragement would help. Anyway, YouTube's scary. And then there's also a place where you can just donate directly to the show if that's your jam too. But anyways, that's all like the housekeeping, the different ways you can support the podcast. Also subscribe to us on whatever podcasting platform you're currently listening to us on. That's also super important. And give the podcast a rating of 5 stars. Should have said that first. That is like the most important thing to do. It helps get the word out about the show, helps suggest it to other people. Just a really easy way to help support the podcast. But anywho's, those are all the ways that you can help get the word out about the show, help support the show, all that jazz and things. Anywho's. All right, before I get any more awkward, let's get into our conversation about inner child work. I personally think if you are going to be a witch who works with Jesus, you need to focus on inner child work. When you look at Jesus in the Bible and the way that he interacted with children and the way that he spoke about children, you could tell that he thought very highly of them and that they were very important to him, and specifically to like the whole kingdom of God message and like really understanding who God and who spirit is. I want to share with you 2 parts of the Bible, specifically 2 sets of verses from Matthew where Jesus is talking about children and how he views them. And I find these to be extremely important. Like for me, these are like the foundation of why I do so much inner child work and why I think inner child work is so important. But I think that these are really important and overlooked areas of the Bible. Because when you're in an evangelical church, a lot of it is centered around control. It's not necessarily centered around like knowing Jesus and knowing who he was and knowing like his lessons. Like, of course, they're like, yeah, let's know his lessons so that you don't sin, but it's not like, let's know his lessons so that he explains to you, you know, the secrets of this is going to sound so woo, this, but the secrets of the universe and like how to connect with God and whatnot. Like, they're like, let's look at Jesus and see what he says about this sin. And in reality, it's just like, one tiny sentence and they're like, don't ever do that again, and it's like, okay. But anyway, these are two passages from Matthew. The first one that we're going to look at is Matthew 18, verses 1 through 5. And in these verses, Jesus, he's talking to the disciples. So, like, they're all, like, sitting and having a conversation, and the disciples asked Jesus, like, why he's spending so much time with kids. Because that's not typical in that time, you know. Like, everybody was it's very different than like culture today, like especially American culture is horrible for parents. Horrible. Like, we're the culture where kids are seen but not heard, and then there's specific places where children can be heard but like not too much. Like, they have to be, you know, still behave in these spaces, which obviously, like, there's a, you know, spectrum of behavior. Like, we're not going to expect our children, or we're not going to accept our children going and smacking other people, but if they're in a child designated space and they want to like scream bloody murder as they're playing, like, they should be allowed to do that. And even if they're not in a child designated space, they should still be allowed to play, obviously, like monitoring voice levels and stuff, just to respect other people. But we really live in a society that doesn't, especially in America, that really doesn't like mothers, really doesn't like children. Like, you see constantly posts on Reddit, like, this woman brought a baby into the restaurant. This baby started screaming while I was having my dinner, and I couldn't even enjoy it because this baby was screaming. Okay, you get to go home after your dinner and not hear the fucking baby scream. You could have taken your food to go to your home where it's quiet without a screaming baby and enjoyed it. Like, you could have removed yourself from that situation, but instead, you expect the mother, who's already isolated enough, to remove herself from the situation because she is a kid. So, you know, it wasn't like that back then, but it was very much like, you know, kids were a part of the family. Kids were meant to be around kids or whatever, but they don't listen to children. They didn't listen to them. There wasn't like this like active conversation between kids, and I think that's what Jesus was highlighting in these verses. So anyway, let's read Matthew 18, 1 through 5. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? He called a little child to him and placed the child amongst them. And he said, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and whoever welcomes such child in my name welcomes me. For me, the key part of this set of verses is the truly I tell you, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So for me, that means like Jesus is telling us, you need to get into a childlike brain and look at God through a childlike lens in order to understand him, in order to understand what heaven is, in order to understand what spirit is, right? So the way that I apply this is like, I think about how I thought about God before the church poisoned me, before I like learned anything about evangelicism. Because like, if you've heard the episode of the Jesus Witch podcast where I the Meet Lena the Jesus Witch episode, and if you're gonna go listen to that, I recommend you listen to the updated version of that, which was released this year. But before I went into church, and like even like my early years of Catholicism, I didn't get that like poisonous message about God, that like really hateful and cynical message about him. I had a mom, or I have a mom, who very much instilled or a sense to me that like God loved us. Like she never pointed out sin. She never pointed out like wrongdoings and be like, oh, God wouldn't like that. She never like highlighted those things. Obviously there was the normal like, don't lie, don't steal, don't kill people kind of thing, and like, you know, those were explained to me as a sin, but I never learned that like specific parts of your personality were a sin until I was much older in life. Like, you know, that message really wasn't hammered down to me until after I had my first baby, when I went to the evangelical church. Because when I grew up in the Catholic church, Now a quick break from this week's episode of the Jesus Witch podcast to talk about a few ways you can help support the show. One way you can help support the creation of the Jesus Witch podcast is to become a supporter of us on Patreon. On our Patreon, there are 4 different tiers that you could choose from, and they're all named after tarot cards. We have the Fool, the Magician, the Hierophant, and the High Priestess. In the Fool tier, you get early ad-free episodes of the Jesus Witch podcast, extended show note pages when available, Christian Tarot grimoire pages, and access to our monthly community oracle reading. In the Hierophant tier, you get everything from the Fool tier, tarot spreads to help your connection with Christ, Spirit, your higher self. I also like to put out new tarot spreads for each full moon or new moon, Wheel of the Year holiday, and zodiac sign. In the Magician tier, you also get 1 Bible-based spell grimoire page each month. This teaches you how to incorporate the Bible into your own spell practice. In the Hierophant tier, you get everything from the Fool and the Magician tiers, as well as a Happy Mail package from me every single month with the ingredients to make a spell, as well as an extra Bible-based spell page for your grimoire. And then you get access to our spellcasting Zoom each month where we do the spell that I sent you together. In the High Priestess tier, you get everything from the Magician, Fool, and Hierophant tiers, as well as an extra Bible-based spell from the Sun and Moon Oily Co. in your Happy Mail package each month, and a one-on-one Zoom call with me every single month to discuss your practice, how you're growing, and any suggestions that I could give to you to help you on your path. Patreon tiers start at $6.66 per month, and you can find the link to that in the show notes page. Another way you can help support the show is by shopping at my Etsy shop, the Sun and Moon Oily Co. Over on the Sun and Moon Oily Co., I offer Bible-based spell oils, ritual bath salts, Jesus Witch or Christian Witch specific mystery boxes, and custom spell oils. Over on my Etsy shop is where you can also book different types of readings with me. I offer tarot readings for your inner child, channel messages from Jesus or from Lilith. I also have a listing for general tarot readings. You could grab a soul contract reading between yourself and another person, or yourself and a deity that you're working with or curious to work with, or even grab an astrology reading for yourself or an astrology reading for your kiddos to help you parent them better and more effectively. There's also Jesus Witch merch on my Etsy shop and so many other things that I am planning on adding to my shop. So head over to the Sun and Moon Oily Co. to check that out. Another thing you can do to support the growth of the Jesus Witch podcast is join our Discord community. The Jesus Witch Church is our free 18-plus Discord community where we host Jesus Witch church services and moon circles. This is your place to ask all Jesus Witch or witchy questions in general and make some really awesome friends. You can find the link to our church in the show notes page. Another free way you could support the Jesus Witch podcast is by sharing this show with a friend and rating it on whatever podcasting app you're using with 5 stars. Leaving us a nice review really helps get the word out about the show, and don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite podcasting app. Another thing you could do to help the creation of the show is send a donation to the Jesus Witch podcast via Cash App or PayPal. It takes a lot of time and effort for me to create the Jesus Witch podcast, and getting donations helps me get the support and help that I need to be able to create this type of content for you. Donations also help keep this podcast free to everybody, so if you love this show and the information that's being put out there, please consider sending a donation to my PayPal or my Cash App. The username on both is the Jesus Witch podcast, but the link for both of those can be found in the show notes page. And the final way that you could help support the creation of the Jesus Witch podcast is by sending me a gift. In the show notes page, I have the link to my Amazon wish list. Everything that I put on this wish list was put there to help create content for you. Simply put, buying things off of this Amazon wish list helps me so that I don't have to purchase them myself, so I can put more of my resources in towards making the Jesus Witch podcast. If you would like to support the Jesus Witch podcast by buying me a gift or in any other way, you could find all the links to everything mentioned in this ad in the show notes page. Now let's get back to the show. I just called them on their bullshit, and it wasn't that hard for me to do it because I was a kid, and as a kid I was very adamant that I knew who God was, and that this image of like a hateful, like throw you into fire and brimstone God that people were trying to tell me about was not real. Like that seemed very contradictory to what, you know, my mom was teaching me about God, and then, you know, what I felt about God as an innocent child. And it did not make sense to me as an innocent child to have a creator who hates his creation, like I understand, if you're an artist or a painter or whatever, you paint things and sometimes you may not be 100% happy with them, but most of the time you're at least like, wow, I accomplished something, I created it. You don't like hate the things that you make. You see every single one of them and you appreciate them for what they are. And that's why I saw God as a kid. So now when I get into a space of like, oh, God hates me, I'm sinning because I'm a witch, I'm this, that, the third, I think about what little Lena would have thought, like, what does she think about this, right? And in her eyes, I'm not lying, I'm not stealing, I'm not killing nobody, so I'm not sinning. How is God not going to love me for what I'm doing? You know what I'm saying? So like that's how I apply that particular verse. So the next ones that we're gonna look at, they're also in Matthew. These verses are Matthew 19, 13, 9, Matthew 19, 13 through 15, which says, then people brought little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them and pray. But the disciples rebuked them, like telling the parents, don't bring your kids near Jesus. And Jesus said, let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. Then he placed his hands on them and went on from there. I think this particular verse just highlights for Jesus how important children were to him. Like, his disciples didn't want him to take the time of day to pray for them, to teach them, to be with them. But Jesus was like, no, I'm going to be with these kids. This is what I want to do right now. And he told them, like, these children are important. Like, they need us because we need them. Like, they're the ones who hold the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and they need us to guide them, obviously, like, into adulthood, but we need them to teach us about spirituality. And as a mom, that's something that I do with my kids quite frequently. Like, I will ask my kids what they think about God, what they think about Jesus, what they think about spirit, and I listen to those things, and to what their ideas are, because ultimately I feel like their opinions are a lot more accurate than mine or yours, because they're still innocent. They're still close. Like, not for nothing. They haven't been on this earth as long as I have. They were just in the spirit realm. Like my son Scott, he's gonna turn 4 this year. He hasn't even been on earth for 4 years. But like 4 years ago, not even 4 years ago, he was still in the spirit realm. Or like technically his spirit was like, going back and forth and figuring out like, what his soul was gonna be as it came to earth and what not and whatever you believe during pregnancy. But any hoozles. It's just really interesting to think about that Jesus was like, we need to listen to kids because they're the kingdom keepers. They know the secrets of heaven. And then, like, if you just think about the grand scheme of life, they're the closest to spirit. Like, they were just there in the spirit realm. Then, obviously, like, the elderly are close to spirit as well because they're about to return home to the spirit realm, and they, elderly people tend to like see things and have experiences, but it's, yeah, and they should be listened to as well when talking about spirit, when talking about like, like I see somebody there, like we should listen to them and focus on that because that's evidence of beyond for us. But when we're looking at how to believe about God and what to think about him, I think we should be asking our kids these questions and listening to them. So now that we've talked about the 2 main Bible verses where Jesus talks about children and why it's important to listen to children and to be childlike ourselves, let's talk about some inner child work and how to do it with Jesus. So technically, I feel like these tips can be used with any deity that you're working on inner child stuff with. And the way that you specifically ask the deity to be with you, so like in our case, we're talking about asking Jesus to be with us during inner child work, is simply asking him, just saying, hey, Jesus, like, this is what I'm going to be working on today. Can you just bring your energy into my space? And sometimes you'll feel his energy in your space. Sometimes you won't. And that's okay if you don't exactly feel it. He's still there. And it's just simply a matter of asking him. If you are a person who really likes to do candles, like deity candles, you can light a candle for Jesus. You can leave out an offering for Jesus. This offering can be something as simple as a glass of water or as something as, intricate as a glass of bread. I was about to say a glass of bread or a slice of bread, which really isn't even that intricate. But the dedication of time to your inner child and your inner child healing could just be an offering to Jesus in itself, and just offering that time and that space to him. And that's another way to just get him involved with what you're doing. So really the only way that you get him into your space and like you have him be there for inner child work with you is to simply ask him. First and foremost, I think a good way to begin inner child work is to talk to your tarot deck about the inner child work that you're doing, or where you should start, so you can kind of use your tarot deck to connect to your inner child. You may want to get a deck specifically for your inner child. You may not. You may just use your regular tarot deck. Me personally, I have the cat tarot, and I like using the cat tarot for inner child work. I like having a more playful deck for my inner child and to talk to her with. When I was when I was a kid, I really liked dogs, so it's not necessarily like what my inner child would like, but like I I grew up not really liking cats, and one, my family just wasn't a cat family. We had dogs. I grew up with like two huskies, and then after they passed away, we got like two little um white floofy dogs. I had a Bichon Frise, and then we had a Maltipoo. And while they were both still alive, we got a Great Dane Pit Bull Lab mix named Trippy, and he's still alive. He's great. So as a kid, I really liked dogs. I wasn't really exposed to them, and I was exposed a lot to that like culture that cats were nasty, and any of the cats that I was around weren't like friendly. They weren't cool. But obviously now I have my two precious baby boy kitty cats, and I love them so much. My Saul and my Bowser. Saul, he irritates the shit out of me. Like, I'm not gonna even lie. Like, he's the villain of the house, but I love him so much. He's so cute. He's precious. He sounds like a little motorboat when he purrs. And then we have Bowser. Bowser's like the love of my life and an animal. Like, I think, and this is sound woo 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 woo, but I think my senior dog Teddy, he passed away. Was it last year? I think he passed away. Might have been the year before. But anyway, after before Teddy passed away, I got Bowser, and part of me almost thinks that like he went up to spirit like the spirit realm before he passed and picked Bowser for me, because Bowser has a lot of similar traits to Teddy, and Teddy was like my he was my Bichon Frise. He was like my first dog. Like, I grew up with the Huskies. They were my parents' dogs before I was born, and we had them until I was like 7 or 8 years old. 8 years old, yeah. And then after the second one passed, I got Teddy, and I got him, like as a birthday present, which really, in retrospect, not the best idea. Like an example from my parents, like you're not supposed to buy animals as gifts like that, like for a birthday or Christmas. But we had all intention of keeping Teddy and having him, and we did. The dog lived until from the time I was 7 until I was like what 24, so 25, something like that. So anyway, obviously it worked out in the end, but don't buy pets as presents. Like, that's not cool. But anyway, I think he, like, picked my cat for me. And, I don't know, as I got older, I realized how there's a lot of hate in our society around cats, and I feel like it's really, like, misogynistic. And I feel like it's, people kind of, like, portraying their hate of cats, as like their hate of women, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can compare the two. So I think, as a girl who grew up not liking other girls, like I was bullied by a lot of girls. I was bullied by a lot of guys too. So I just found like guys to be simpler growing up. Like, I had more guy friends than I did girls. As I've gotten older, that's definitely shifted a bit. But I feel like I didn't like cats that much as a kid because I didn't like what other girls were doing to me as a kid, and girls were so closely associated with cats. So, anyway, long story short, a way of healing my inner child is and like healing that like misogynistic viewpoint that I had and that like hatred of cats that I had is using my cat tarot deck to talk to my inner child. And when you grab a inner child tarot reading with me, that's the deck that I use because I just absolutely love it for inner child readings. I feel like it's super playful. I feel like if you're going to buy a deck specific to your inner child, and again, you don't have to do this, like I wanted a deck specifically for my inner child. Jesus wanted a deck specifically for my inner child. I feel like that's really the deck that he comes through a lot with. I obviously, like, for my talking to Jesus and my, like, normal everyday readings with him, I use for me personally, I use the Light Seers deck. And when I read for other people, I'll either use the Light Seers deck or the Wandering Star Tarot deck. And he speaks fine through those, but I feel like he really loves that specific inner child tarot deck. Like, he really connects with it and he really comes through for me with it. So I bought that because it's a little bit more playful of a deck. Actually, technically, I was gifted that by a follower, Anna. She gave me my cat tarot deck. I think I still have the thank you note from the little Amazon package that came in it. Anyway, but I if you're gonna get a tarot deck for your inner child, I recommend getting like a more playful tarot deck, something that is fun, something that is inner child-y, that can kind of like speak to a kid, or getting a tarot deck of like something that you really liked as a kid. Like the easiest example for that is if you were a Disney kid, they have like the Disney villains deck. I think they have a Disney princess deck. I don't know. But you could definitely find Disney adjacent tarot things. So, like, that's easy. I'm pretty sure they have, like, quote unquote nerdy decks like Star Wars and Marvel and all of that good stuff. So, you could definitely find something that hits a niche that you liked as a child, or just finding a deck that's more playful, more colorful, more, has a little bit more of that, childlike whimsicalness to it to use to talk to your inner child. So that's like the easiest thing to do, like on a daily basis, I guess, if you're working with your inner child. Me personally, I don't talk to my inner child through tarot on a daily basis. I do it every once in a while. I think there's also, I should have established this in the beginning of the episode. But there's also layers to your inner child, right? So there's like obviously your inner like toddler, right? There's every age that you've been has been there. And when you're, a child, you're under 18. Anything under 18 is considered a child. That's your childhood. So your inner child is all of those ages. So some people might be working on healing their inner child. Some people might be working on healing their inner toddler. Some people might be working on healing their inner tween and teen. Me personally, that's where I'm at, is healing my inner teen and tween. My inner child, I feel like I'm very blessed. I don't have a inner child who was necessarily damaged. I had, parents that really supported me, like made me feel really confident, and like genuinely, like I just didn't give a shit about what people thought about me for a very long time. When I was in end of fourth, beginning of fifth grade, I started to get bullied really bad in school. And I think that's when it shifted for my inner child. And that's when I kind of realized, like, or I started to think that I wasn't as cool as I thought I was. Newsflash, I was as cool as I thought I was. And I'm not saying that in an egotistical way. Everybody needs to love themselves to some degree. So, like, I was not a weird kid, if you really think about it. I mean, did dress a little weird for a period of time in middle school. I went through the whole, like, emo scene phase. So I had like the fingerless, like striped gloves and the heavy black makeup and like literally tutus, neon colored tutus over my jeans. I don't know. Yeah, but I feel like that's more of the part of me that needs to be healed is her. And, I was very much pushed into the scene category, the emo category, because I was bullied, so bad. And it like made me want to wear black and like start to disappear because, when I was wearing bright colors and when I was dressing more creatively, with my tutus and whatnot, I was being bullied, and then that also like shifted my music taste because you're going to Hot Topic and you're buying all your clothes there, and then there's Fall Out Boy on the screen at Hot Topic, so now all of a sudden all you listen to is like Fall Out Boy and We the Kings and Panic at the Disco and 21 Pilots and all that stuff. So I definitely am healing my inner tween and inner teen. That's kind of where the space I'm at now. Like kind of just to segue into the next thing that I feel like is really important for inner child or inner teen or inner, tween healing is music. And we obviously had a whole podcast episode about working with music, and you guys know music's really important to me. So obviously it's like really important to my inner child practice, and I feel like it's such an easy way to be a part of your inner child practice. So obviously I like to listen to music that my inner child likes. I like to indulge in music that my inner teen likes. And so like I listen to a lot of like One Direction. The one thing I have steered away from is listening to emo music. So like I don't listen to like 21 Pilots anymore, or Fall Out Boy, or Panic, or All Time Low, or We the Kings, or all these bands that I used to love so much, and they still have such a fond place in my heart. I just don't listen to them anymore because I realized that their music was portraying an emotion that other people made me feel. And I was feeling it at the time, and I don't feel that way about myself now. And I kind of don't want to remember how I felt about myself then. So I listened to the music that I kind of missed out on, and I missed out on being a real big fan of because of the category that my peers had put me in. So, I was a big One Direction fan before I went like real hardcore into my emo phase. Like I was a huge One Direction fan. I literally met One Direction. Like I literally like at their first ever like press tour in the United States. They for Up All Night, they were doing free CD signings at Walmarts all over America. And there was one in Jersey, and my aunt lived in Jersey, so I made my aunt take me to this signing so I could meet One Direction. Like I was that big of a fan that I was getting people like the worst thing I ever did to my parents ever was I snuck out of the house and I stole my mom's debit card. So and my mom's train pass so I could go take the train and stalk One Direction in New York City and like go outside of the concert venue that they were playing at and listen to their show and then like chase the car with everybody. Like your girl was hyped for One Direction. And then I started getting really badly bullied, and basically that music was made to not be for me. So I stopped listening to it. But now I do listen to it and I embrace it. And I am literally wearing a One Direction Up All Night tour shirt as I talk to you about this. Um, yeah, so music's another big thing that you could do. Another thing, and this is so cheesy, like if you have kids, even if you don't have kids, you could do this because like kid shows are bopping sometimes, especially the ones that we grew up with. Like, I mean, I'm 26, so if you're in my age category, I'm talking about the ones that we grew up with. Like we had like Little Bear and Franklin, and we just had like the best shows. But my favorite as a kid was the Wiggles. So I love the Wiggles. If you were on my TikTok lives, especially early on, like I would talk about the Wiggles all the time because Scott was still in his Wiggles phase at that point, and my favorite classic Wiggle song is like "Can You Point Your Fingers and Do the Twist," and the original one, like with "Everybody's Twisting," Greg. You got to listen to the one with the original Wiggles. But then my favorite modern Wiggles song is the "Full Moon, Full Moon, Full Moon, Shooby Dooby Dooby Ba, Shooby Dooby Doo." I freaking love that. Like, the Wiggles bring so much happiness to my life. So, like, I will watch Wiggles videos. Do I watch them all the times with my kids? No. No, I don't. I follow the Wiggles on TikTok. I love the Wiggles TikTok. They're so funny. Like they make their TikToks for adults. I mean, like there are kid TikToks on there. You can show your kids a couple of them, but there are ones that like only adults will get the joke, and it's so good. I want to go to a Wiggles concert so bad. My husband and I realized that like Wiggles do tour in America, so one day we might be bringing a child. To a Wiggles concert. I wish they did like 20. They do it in Australia. I don't think they do it here in the States, but I wish they did like 21 plus Wiggles concerts. I would love that. I would love that. Oh my god, like a margarita and the Wiggles. Classic. So yeah, like watching shows that you liked as a kid. I also like to watch Hannah Montana. Another thing that I like to do, I literally only like a handful of movies in the world. I'm not a big movie girly. I love TV shows, but movies, they're not really like for me. But my favorite movie in the entire world, I have watched this movie a million and one times. But my favorite movie is Mean Girls. I watched it a lot as a kid, and it was very cathartic to me because I was bullied by a group of mean girls. So I loved that movie as a kid. And now, anytime that I'm really upset or I'm really depressed or I really need like a pick me up, I watch Mean Girls. And I don't care how many times I've watched it. I don't care if it's like been 2 weeks since the last time I watched it. It makes me laugh every single time. And even like the parts that are like predictable, like the if you're from Africa, why are you white? Oh my god, Karen, you can't just go around asking people why they're white. Like even that shit sends me. Like it's so funny. It is so nostalgic. I love, 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 love that movie. I'm not a huge fan of like any of the people that are like in it specifically. I root for Lindsay Lohan. I think she's awesome. She just had a baby and she posted, oh my god, she posted on Instagram, like she's partnering with Frida Mom. So she posted on Instagram, I'm not a regular mom, I'm a postpartum mom. Oh my god. So like I love Mean Girls. I love Mean Girls. It's just that movie is iconic. It's iconic and it did so much for me as a kid. It still does so much for me as an adult and it's a great way for me to connect with my inner child was watching Mean Girls. So, like that's another piece of advice is watching things that you liked as a kid. That is so simple. It's so easy. Like even if you could only watch clips on YouTube, YouTube's free. You could watch free clips of the Wiggles on YouTube. You could watch free, scenes of Mean Girls on YouTube. Like you find your niche, you do your niche or whatever like you liked as a kid, and you find that and you watch that and you consume that and you let your inner child indulge in the things that, they like to watch. So another thing that I do for inner child work, and this one I guess I technically like I invite Jesus into this, but I technically like also invite Mother Mary into this. But is I parent my kids the way that I wish that I was parented. And, like I love my parents. My parents were great. They did a lot of things absolutely right, but they also did a lot of things wrong. And I'm not going to go into details because I don't feel like that's fair to myself or my relationship with my parents or, them in general. But there are specific things that they did to me as a kid or they did around me as a kid or they like kind of let happen in our home that I myself and my husband are just we're not doing that for our kids. I guess the best example for that one would be, and that I'm like willing to share is like my parents ran to the doctor with everything for me. And I get it, you're a first time parent. It's hard. I was born in the 90s. Google wasn't there. There weren't mommy groups. You couldn't go and find, alternatives as easily and as readily as you can. And then I was a preemie. I was like born, if you listen to last week's episode, I talked a little bit about, my me being born birth story. And so like I get where they were coming from. However, like, I had a bunch of unnecessary medications and things shoved down my throat when I was a kid, and now, like, as a result, I have allergies to some of these medicines. And like I said, I don't hold this against my parents, and, I'm not crazy. I understand medicine is needed when it's needed. If my kids have a fever, I'm giving them the Tylenol. Like, let's be very clear. Like, we don't fuck around. But I also don't run to the doctor with every little thing. If my kids are just coughing and sneezing and they have a little cold, we ride it out at home. If they have to be seen, if they're not getting better in a few days, if, they're really lethargic, if I'm concerned, if they're breathing funny, if they look weird, I bring them straight to the doctor. And like, my pediatrician, he loves me for this. He's said to me several times that he could trust me as a parent because he knows I have very good judgment when it comes to my children's health care because I don't fuck around with it. Because like I said, I don't want my kids to be sick like I am. I don't want my kids to have the allergies that I do. I don't want them to feel the way that I do about my body because of the decisions that were made when I was a kid and the interventions that happened when I was a kid that maybe weren't the best idea for me. So I just try to do that backwards with my kids and I try to not backwards. I try to do what I wish happened for my body, like what I think my body would have thrived with. And you know what? My kids are really healthy, so I think I'm doing something right. So that's another way that I heal my inner child. And, that might not be specifically to your parenting journey, and that's okay. Everybody has a different parenting journey, and everybody has different reasons for their kids coming to them and their kids choosing them. But I really do think that parenthood is an excellent opportunity for us as, like, trying to be more, like, so fully aware people or whatever word you want to put there. it's a good opportunity for us to work with our inner child and to heal our inner child and to do, to treat our kids the way that we wanted to be treated. So, another way that you could work with your inner child is to do childish things. So, that's things like playing, going to amusement parks, just doing things that are playful, going and putting your hands in the mud, like whatever it may be that really feeds your inner child, like a different, like whatever activity does that. So for me, I loved Sesame Place when I was a kid. So when every year, or I try every year. I don't go every year. Maybe like once every other year we go, or like, well, twice technically, because they have like the buy one ticket and get one free package. But I take my kids to Sesame Place and I love it, and it's so much fun, and it's a great place for like the kids, but it's also really nostalgic, because I went there when I was a kid. I went there like with my parents and my cousins, and my whole family went there. It was just I used to go there with friends. Like, it's a fun place, so I take my kids there as often as I can, which is like not super often, but it's often enough. And obviously, it doesn't need to be as extravagant as that. And if you don't have kids, like, you're not going to be going to a literal child's amusement park. Like, I get that. So, modifying to what would fit your needs. So, like, let's say, you're not going to go to like Sesame Place, but you want to go to a water park, like a themed water park. You could definitely find one of those. I don't know of any personally, because the only water park I've really gone to is that one. But also, like, I mean, like, a lot of people have been taking themselves out to like Barbie movie, like as like a date for themselves, and that's like super healing for in like an inner child, and it's like super validating kind of thing, and just doing things like that that are a little bit more childlike, a little bit more playful, going to a toy store and browsing around, or even just this toy section of Target and browsing around, or even if you're at Five Below, buying yourself a Squishmallow or just something that you think your inner child would like, just indulging that more playful side of your brain. And if you think about it, right, like, guys are encouraged to keep their toys. They're encouraged to keep their like inner child. They have video games, they have their man caves where they go and they have their, all of their little toys and their consoles and all that good stuff. And that's great. Like, that's awesome. You should absolutely be connected with your inner child. But then women, we're like, what do we have for our inner children? Like, what is absolute, like, what's made for our inner child? What, like a new vacuum cleaner? Like, up until like the Barbie movie, and like, like makeup brands like ColourPop did like a Lisa Frank collaboration, but like up until that, like, you haven't really seen many things that are just made for women to indulge their childlike side. So it's really important to, especially if you're somebody who identifies as a woman, to find things that I help you bring out your inner child, because it's a lot easier for men. And I know that I'm generalizing, because there are a lot of girls that like video games and like, more quote unquote boyish things. Like, I know I'm generalizing here, but anyway, long story short, it's easier for like guys to do it than women. And that's not really fair to us. So we need to like reclaim that and start indulging in our playful sides too. The last tip that I have for inner child work, and this is not one that I personally do because I don't feel the need to do it yet, um, but I feel like it could be really useful, is to write letters to your inner child. And, these could be letters of things that you wished that had happened to your little inner child, or like apologizing for things that have happened to your inner child, like saying that they didn't deserve those things. But, giving yourself the space to like get out some of the things that you feel about your inner child and some of the experiences that you had as a child, without having to be super public about it. But then on the same aspect, if you want to talk to people about things that happened to you as a child, like you have like a therapist, or somebody who you really trust and is close to you, and you want to tell them about those things, then that absolutely, like, go for that. But the point being, getting your emotion out about your inner child. I think that for me, my husband and I, since we're parenting together, we talk a lot about like our childhoods and what we wish we could have had, or like what we wish we could have experienced, or like things that we wish we didn't experience, and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like I do a lot of that kind of debriefing with him. But if you don't have somebody to do that with, definitely journaling and talking to your inner child themselves would be useful. Or, if you have somebody to soundboard off of, then absolutely do that, do that as well. Do both. Do whatever feels right for you. I don't know. For me, it just feels right to talk to somebody. I'm not a big journaler. I definitely have started journaling a little bit more recently just to if I'm really frustrated in the moment, like I'll just write down like I'm so fucking frustrated right now, and that's like it. Um, but I'm not a big journaler, but I know a lot of people like to journal, so that's why I recommend it. So that's this week's episode of the Jesus Witch podcast, where we talked about inner child work. I hope that this episode was useful for you and gave you a few ideas on how you could work with your inner child, inspired you to do inner child work, and told you why inner child work is important for Jesus and Christian witches. I think specifically if you're working with Jesus, you gotta be engaging your inner child in some sort of way. It's like super important for Jesus. I think I that's my personal opinion. But anyway, that was this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the Jesus Witch podcast on whatever podcasting platform you're currently listening to us on, and give the show a rating of 5 stars, because that really helps get the word out about what we're doing here and helps recommend the show to other people. If you would like to support the Jesus Witch podcast or join our free Discord group or follow me on my social medias, you can find the links to everything, my TikTok, my Patreon, all the good stuff in the show notes page. My Etsy, all of that is in there. So now it's time for my favorite part of every episode of the Jesus Witch podcast, our verse of the day, or week, or whatever. Um, the verse that I want to talk about today is Psalm 20, verse 4, which says, "May he grant your heart's desires and make all your plans succeed." I think this could be a great spell work verse. I think it'd be a really good one to use in a manifestation spell. I can't remember if I used this as a verse of the day recently. I feel like I did. So if I did, my bad. But I'm using it again because I really like it. I think it's a good. Again, like I said, I think it's a really good verse to use for manifestation spells. I think it's a good one, especially if you're trying to manifest a new job or manifest success in a class or something where there's a really clear path to success. I think that's a really good verse to use for that. So that's why I wanted to share it today. So, anyways, thank you again for listening to this week's episode, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.